Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked. The choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world clings to a comforting illusion in this timeline that the Malfoy heir is, at worst, a petty aristocratic bully whose loyalties never truly waver. They are wrong. On the night of the Battle of Hogwarts, the Astronomy Tower is not a memory of Dumbledore's fall, but a crucible. The sky is torn open by curses, the castle a burning fortress of collapsing stone and shattered wards, and Draco Malfoy stands on the parapet with his wand shaking, not at a headmaster, not at Harry Potter, but held level between Voldemort's advancing ranks and a single figure behind the boy who lived, Hermione Granger, a muggle-born witch, hair wild in the wind, eyes locked on the boy bred from infancy to hate her existence. What if, in this moment, his terror is not of failure, but of losing her? The wizarding world has always insisted that its greatest existential threat was Harry's survival, the living refutation of Voldemort's power. In this Slytherin timeline, that assumption collapses. The true danger is quieter, more insidious. The possibility that a Malfoy scion of wealth, authority, and blood supremacy might betray his caste for the brightest muggle born in their year. Ideologies do not implode because enemies defy them. They implode when their own heirs defect. One forbidden attachment can be tactically lethal. In this timeline, the familiar milestones remain, but their resonance bends. The word mudblood still slices across the Hogwarts courtyard in Draco's second year, a rehearsed weapon launched at Hermione with all the methodical certainty his father drilled into him. Yet the instant recoil, the way her face crumples, the way Weasley's hex misfires and slugs back onto him, lodges in Draco's mind like shrapnel. He will replay that syllable for years, a curse that begins to corrode the ideology behind it. The Yule Ball still glitters with chandeliers and self-playing waltzes, but when Hermione descends the staircase on Victor Crumb's arm, Draco's sneer hides something sharper, more dangerous than scorn. Envy, curiosity, the dawning recognition that the girl he dismissed as a know-it-all has become a gravitational center in the room, a masterpiece to be molded by no one, least of all him. Time-turner shadows still cross the forbidden forest, but now, somewhere in the dark, a pale boy lingers half a corridor away from catastrophe, hesitating, one breath too long, before raising his wand. This is not a fluffy romance pasted over canon. It is a political and psychological thriller in which one illicit fixation starts to rot an entire pureblood power structure from within. Draco's heart is not a redemption arc. It is a weapon being polished in the dark, its edge turning slowly away from Voldemort's enemies and toward his expectations. Because if, on that tower, Draco's love alters even a single decision, one insult swallowed instead of spoken, one curse redirected, one warning whispered in a deserted classroom, the second wizarding war fractures along new, invisible fault lines. Voldemort's methodical certainty falters, the Malfoy legacy splinters, and the Golden Trio's dynamics twist under the pressure of a Slytherin who will not quite stay their enemy. In the next section, we will trace the first crack, the exact moment Draco Malfoy's hatred of a mudblood begins to transform into something far more dangerous. Inciting divergence, the day the insult backfired, the fracture begins on a bright, cold November day above a Quidditch pitch painted in red and gold. The world remembers it as the match where Draco Malfoy spat the word mudblood like venom. In this timeline, that insult is not an apex of cruelty, but the first misfire of a weapon he does not yet understand, turned disastrously inward. The scene is familiar: Slytherin versus Gryffindor. The roar of the stands, the green and silver banners snapping like war pennants in the wind. Draco, new Seeker, is performing for an invisible tribunal of Malfoy ancestors, for Lucius's expectations, for an ideology that has always promised him he is superior by birthright alone. Hermione disrupts that certainty simply by existing. She is on the sideline, hair wild in the November air, arguing rules with a precision that would make any barrister flinch, her eyes following the game with a tactically lethal focus. When she fires back at him, quoting Quidditch regulations, House Cup standings, and Snape's own bias with embarrassing accuracy, Draco experiences, for the first time, an emotion his upbringing has no language for: attraction laced with intellectual fear. Lucius's voice lives in his skull like a permanent charm. Blood will tell. Mudbloods are accidents, aberrations, flashes of power with no lineage to sustain them. Narcissa's influence is quieter, an alpine chill of aesthetic disdain. For her, proper witches are curated like art in a marble gallery, their ancestry as important as their poise. Hermione Granger violates both doctrines. She is brilliant with no pedigree, formidable with no patron. A masterpiece that emerged from what he has been taught is filth. Her existence is a personal affront to Malfoy authority. So when the insult leaves his mouth, it is not the smooth, rehearsed slur of a boy secure in his supremacy. It is a panicked overcorrection, a verbal hexcast to smother the rising dissonant awareness that her mind resonates with his in ways Pansy Parkinson's simpering never has. The word lands, the stands recoil. Hermione's face changes. Canon remembers the tears, the shock, the way Hagrid explains the term with rough compassion. In this timeline, the camera does not cut away from Draco. It lingers. He waits for the expected surge of satisfaction, the dark thrill of dominance his father always promised would accompany putting a mudblood in her place. It does not come. Instead, he is haunted by a single, surgical detail. Before her eyes gloss, before Ron lunges, there is a flicker of contempt in Hermione's gaze, cold, assessing, as if she is watching a lesser mind fail an exam. That look lodges under his skin like shrapnel. Cognitive dissonance becomes the motif of the Slytherin timeline from this second forward. Hermione is the crack in the Malfoy marble, the hairline fracture no one else can see. That night, in the quiet fortress of the Slytherin dormitory, Draco sits at his desk with a self-inking quill and a sheet of heavy Malfoy stationery. He begins the letter exactly as Lucius expects, a report of the match, a boast about putting a mudblood in her place. But when he reaches her name, his hand stalls. Hermione. The quill blots. He imagines Lucius reading it, imagines that cool approval, that methodical certainty, and, for the first time in his life, Draco edits himself before his father. The sentence becomes vague, bloodless, stripped of detail. The word remains. The girl is erased. The fracture has begun, and it will not stay hairline for long. Year 2 rewritten. The heir of Slytherin and the girl he should hate. By second year, that edited letter becomes a quiet fault line running through Draco Malfoy's life. The castle does the rest. When the heir of Slytherin is whispered about in corridors, every eye in the school turns instinctively toward the pale boy with the aristocratic sneer and the serpent on his chest. They are wrong. In canon, Draco revels in it, plays the part of juvenile tyrant with theatrical relish. In this timeline, the role fits like armor over blistered skin. Each new petrified student should be a triumph for his ideology, a dark confirmation that Muggleborns are prey in a world built for his bloodline. Instead, terror arrives disguised as anticipation. Whenever a rumor spreads, another attack, another body, his first, involuntary thought is not victory. It is her name, Hermione Granger, hand in the air with methodical certainty, dismantling Snape's questions, correcting even the textbooks as if the world is a poorly written essay. She is the living refutation of everything he has been taught to worship, and yet his pulse spikes every time she walks into a room alive. Obsession in the Slytherin timeline does not look like flowers and confessions. It looks like surveillance. Draco begins to orbit her days with the precision of a strategist mapping a battlefield. He lingers at the library entrance, ostensibly to mock her pathetic study habits, but his eyes are counting how long she stays, who she leaves with, which corridors she chooses. In potions, he leans back just enough to hear her whisper to Potter and Weasley, storing every fragment of her schedule under the pretext of gathering ammunition. He tells himself he is cataloguing a weakness. He is actually checking a pulse. Parallel to this, another weapon is being polished in the dark. Draco watches Ginny Weasley with a detached disdain that curdles into unease. Ink-stained hands, vacant stares, the way she flinches from loud noises, as if hearing a voice no one else can. When he glimpses the battered diary, feels the cold resonance of old magic around it. Recognition slams into him with alpine clarity. This is Black family work. Malfoy work. Lucius's work. The realization that his father's scheme might be the invisible hand tightening around Hermione's throat does something unprecedented. It destabilizes Draco's loyalty. Authority, once a fortress, becomes a question. His first act of rebellion is microscopic, deniable. When Crabbe and Goyle boast about teaching the mudblood a lesson near the greenish light of the common room fire, Draco casually redirects them, inventing a prefect patrol, a better target, a more amusing prank. Later, spotting Hermione alone near a shadowed corridor, he raises his voice to shred Filch's competence in front of passing students, drawing a noisy crowd that makes an ambush impossible. To outside observers, he is merely cruel. He is, in fact, quietly lethal on her behalf. And then comes the night that should have broken the world open. In canon, Hermione walks alone mirror clutched like a shield she does not yet understand, and never sees the basilisk. In this timeline, Draco is moving through the same corridor system, agitated by a rumor of another attack. Following the map of her habits, he pretends not to have memorized. He turns the corner, too late. The mirror lies cracked on the stone, reflecting the slack, frozen horror of her face and his own pale shock above it, a grotesque soul resonance trapped in glass. For the first time in his life, Draco Malfoy's grief is real, private, and utterly useless. He cannot scream, cannot touch her, cannot confess to a body that cannot hear. He walks away from the scene, a different masterpiece to be moulded. And when the Whispers name Potter as the inevitable hero of the chamber, Draco makes a decision that will drag this war off its rails. He will not let the Gryffindors be the only ones trying to save her. Alternate upbringings. Malfoy Marble versus Granger Fire. Draco decides he will not let the Gryffindors be the only ones trying to save her without ever admitting why. Because the boy who walks back into Malfoy Manor after the chamber incident does not enter a home. He steps onto a stage. The corridors are polished to a mirror's cruelty, every surface reflecting him as a pale imitation of the portraits that line the walls. Generations of Malfoys gaze down with methodical certainty, frames like gilded verdicts. In this fortress of marble and silence, affection is not spoken. It is audited. Lucius rules this world with measured contempt. Praise is a weapon being polished in the dark, drawn only when it will secure obedience, weakness, hesitation, softness. These are not merely frowned upon, they are prosecuted. Narcissa moves through the same halls as a study in brittle elegance, every gesture precise, every smile rehearsed, a masterpiece to be moulded that was never allowed to be unfinished. Draco is not raised to feel, he is raised to perform pure-blood perfection on command. Hermione's origin story is an insult to that entire ideology, simply by existing. Her house is small, carpet worn at the edges, the kitchen table perpetually half buried in books and dental journals. But the air is warm in a way Malfoy Manor never permits. When she brings home grades, her parents do not calculate political advantage. They tape test papers to the fridge and take her out for ice cream. She is, from the beginning, too much, too clever, too intense, too eager to correct the world. Hogwarts gives Draco a stage. It gives Hermione a language. The castle translates her excess into power, arithmancy charts, spell theory, timelines of magical lore that prove she is not an anomaly, but an apex. For the first time, she is not just the odd muggle-born girl who reads ahead. She is the witch who can outpace the syllabus. They tell themselves, this is where their paths diverge. They are wrong. Because beneath the ideological war, the same pressure system is operating. Both are obsessive about excellence. Both crave recognition. Both are terrified of being insignificant in a world that measures worth in bloodlines or brilliance. Draco's arrogance and Hermione's rule following are different armors strapped over the same fear, that without their performance, they vanish. Their flaws lock together with dangerous precision. Draco's cowardice, his instinct to survive by bending to the strongest authority in the room, meets Hermione's moral rigidity, her refusal to bend even when the rules are already corrupt. His desperate need to belong to a group, any group, collides with her habit of isolating herself through superiority, retreating into libraries and timetables when people disappoint her. In another timeline, these traits simply grate across house lines. In this Slytherin timeline, they generate a kind of soul resonance. Pattern interrupt. This is not a tender romance laid over schoolyard bickering. It is an emotional Cold War. Draco is the heir of a marble ideology that names her a contamination. Hermione is the brightest product of a Muggle world his father once erased. For either of them, to love the other is not a minor rebellion. It is a declaration of war on their own origin story, a betrayal of the very foundations that made them. Which means the first time Draco chooses Hermione over his upbringing, it cannot be casual. It will be a strategic crisis. Year 3, Time Turners, Dementors, and a Slytherin's first betrayal. Year 3 is where that strategic crisis stops being theoretical and puts on a Slytherin robe. The Buckbeak incident is the first battlefield. Publicly, nothing changes. Draco still goads the hippogriff, still flinches, still seizes the opportunity to perform agony for an audience trained to believe him. But in this timeline, the performance has a second, unintended spectator, himself. When Hermione's outrage detonates across the lawn, it is not merely Gryffindor righteousness. It is a forensic indictment of his cowardice, delivered with methodical certainty. Her slap lands. The world hears skin on skin. Draco hears doctrine shatter. For 11 years he has been told that Muggleborns are an infection in the bloodstream of wizarding power, yet here is Hermione Granger, hand still trembling, eyes blazing, with a moral authority he has never seen in his own father. The sting on his cheek is temporary, the echo in his ideology is not. In that moment, he understands that she is dangerous, precisely because she feels like a masterpiece to be moulded by the wrong side. The Dementors arrive as if summoned by that crack in his certainty. On the Quidditch pitch, when the sky curdles and the temperature plummets, everyone assumes Draco Malfoy is afraid of the creatures themselves. They are wrong. What freezes him is recognition. The hollow, gliding figures are a living prophecy of his own projected future, a life drained of warmth, orbiting his father's will, a weapon being polished in the dark corridors of pureblood expectation. He watches Potter collapse, watches Hermione lean over Harry in the hospital wing later, speaking in low, urgent tones about Patronus charms and resistance. Draco listens from the doorway longer than he should. Hermione practicing a Patronus with Harry is, to him, not just advanced magic. It is an act of rebellion against despair. He envies it with a ferocity that scares him. A Patronus is soul resonance made visible, a luminous argument that one's happiest memories can be weaponized against the dark. What memory, he wonders, with a sudden humiliating clarity, would he even use? The Time Turner Knight fractures his certainty further. Skulking near Hagrid's hut to savor Buckbeak's execution as proof that the world still bends toward Malfoy influence, he sees something impossible. Hermione near the pumpkin patch, and another blur of Hermione vanishing into the trees. He blinks, curses the fog, and files it away behind a sneer. Publicly, he dismisses it as Gryffindor incompetence. Privately, he recognizes the pattern. She is moving in spaces and timelines he cannot yet chart. His first betrayal of Slytherin comes wrapped in plausible deniability. A knot of Slytherins, boys raised on the same doctrine, whisper about luring Hermione toward the Dementors after a late library session, just close enough to watch her break. Teach the mudblood her place. This is the Slytherin timeline they expect. Cruelty as tradition, terror as entertainment. Draco intervenes without ever naming it that. He smirks, recalibrates, and suggests a different target, some terrified second-year Hufflepuff, whose panic will be easier to mock and less politically volatile. He sells it as efficiency, as tactically lethal mischief. The group laughs, agrees, and disperses, never realizing the axis he has quietly shifted. That night, in the green-lit silence of the Slytherin dorms, Draco lies awake and counts the betrayals. He has redirected harm away from a Muggle born on purpose. No one saw. No one will ever praise him for it. Yet the knowledge sits on his chest like a weight and a key at once. For the first time, Draco Malfoy protects Hermione Granger and discovers that the most dangerous treason is the one committed entirely in the dark. The power framework, how love becomes Draco's new dark art. In the dark, Draco begins to understand that he has been trained for this treason all his life. The world thinks the Malfoy heir was simply raised to sneer and hex. They are wrong. In this timeline, his childhood has functioned as a meticulous dark arts curriculum, not of spells, but of reflexes. Fear is to be transmuted into cruelty before it can paralyze. Insecurity is to be lacquered over with dominance before anyone can smell weakness. Doubt is to be buried beneath obedience to the Malfoy name, the way a cursed object is sealed in lead. What Lucius calls poise is, in practice, a weapon being polished in the dark. Draco has been drilled to read a room the way a duelist reads a wand, cataloguing allegiances, vulnerabilities, who flinches when a professor raises their voice. In the Slytherin timeline, those same observational skills begin to swivel, almost imperceptibly, toward a single gravitational point: Hermione Granger. The girl he once reduced to a slur becomes the fixed variable in every calculation. Who is sitting behind her in potions? Whose wand hand twitches when she corrects Snape? Which corridor routes allow him to accidentally be present when tempers are likely to ignite? His talent for manipulation, once deployed to humiliate, is quietly repurposed into misdirection. A whispered comment here, a redirected insult there, and suddenly Ron Weasley is the one storming away from a confrontation that would have left Hermione cornered by older Slytherins. Each move is small, plausibly deniable, tactically lethal, only in aggregate. Love, in this framework, is not soft. It is a ruthless reallocation of Draco's limited courage. He does not have a name for this system at first. It feels like standard occlumency, the family art of shutting doors in the mind. But the architecture is wrong. He is not walling off Death Eater secrets from the Order. He is walling off a heresy from his own blood. Emotional occlumency, the deliberate partitioning of his inner world so that his attraction to a Muggle-born can exist as a sealed chamber, untraceable, even under his father's gaze. Here, the fortress metaphor becomes literal. Draco's mind arranges itself as Malfoy Manor. Long corridors of ancestral expectation, rooms full of portraits that hiss about purity and war, locked doors behind which he He stores carefully edited memories. And then there is the Forbidden Wing, the single room he returns to in the silence before sleep. In that room, he allows one indulgence, Hermione's voice, replayed with methodical certainty, answering Snape without flinching, correcting McGonagall with sources, challenging authority with a courage he cannot yet locate in himself. Every visit to that inner room has a price. To nudge a hex off course in a crowded hallway, he must lie about where he was looking. To forget to pass along a corridor password, he must betray a housemate's trust. To misreport what he overheard in the common room, he must become an unreliable son. Each act of secret protection is paid for with a fresh fracture somewhere else in the fortress. The cost compounds. Draco's courage is finite, and he spends it not in grand defiance, but in 1,000 hairline treasons that no one will ever see. Yet this is how a masterpiece is moulded, not by a single heroic gesture, but by a sustained, invisible resistance to the script he was given. What happens when that private system collides with open war, when Voldemort's orders and Hermione's life finally occupy the same line of fire? Macro timeline, a war quietly tilting around one girl. When the war finally steps into the open, it will look sudden. Green light over a graveyard, a name reborn in fire. But in this timeline, the tilt toward that moment has been quietly accumulating in classrooms and corridors around one girl who never asked to be a battlefield. Year 1 lays the foundation with an insult that never quite lands the way Draco expects. On the Hogwarts Express, he watches Harry choose Hermione, awkward, over-earnest, already correcting people's pronunciation, over the safety of a pure-blood handshake. The troll incident completes the humiliation. Harry and Ron charge into danger for her, and Draco, frozen in the doorway of the boys' bathroom, realizes that whatever bravery is, it does not look like waiting for a teacher. From that point, Harry becomes an unwanted benchmark, a living rebuke that follows him through every corridor, a rival, and worse, an example. Year 2 weaponizes that discomfort into something darker. Draco spits mudblood on the Quidditch pitch and watches Hermione flinch. The Slytherin table roars with approval, but the resonance it leaves in his chest is not triumph. It is acid. The Chamber of Secrets turns abstract ideology into physical horror. A diary that thinks, a basilisk that hunts, a girl his age left cold and marble still in the hospital wing. Hermione's petrification is his first encounter with helplessness that is not about his own skin. He stands at the threshold of the ward, under pretense of mocking Weasley, and cannot quite force himself to look at her face. Cursed artifacts are no longer fascinating family heirlooms. They are a weapon being polished in the dark, and his father is far too comfortable holding the whetstone. By year 3, the pattern has sharpened. Buckbeak's trial should be a clean victory. Malfoy influence, ministry deference, a public spectacle of authority. Instead, Draco watches Hermione punch him in broad daylight, then watches her vanish on the Time-Turner night and reappear with a hippogriff that should be dead. She breaks the law not for power, but for justice, and makes it look inevitable. In the Slytherin timeline he was promised, rule-breaking belongs to boys like him. Yet when he measures his own cowardice against her methodical certainty, the scales are not kind. So year 4 opens with overcompensation. As the Triwizard banners go up, his mockery of SPEW grows louder, more vicious, targeting the very moral clarity that has begun to attract others to her orbit. He ridicules her badges, sabotages her leaflets, calls her obsession with house elves pathetic, even as he notes, with clinical unease, that she is building something he has never had, a cause that is not about herself. Each insult is a denial, each prank a futile attempt to shove her back into a role he understands. Annoyance, obstacle, enemy, rather than the masterpiece to be molded that his treacherous attention keeps insisting she might be. And when, in June, the dark mark burns over a distant graveyard and Voldemort returns, the world believes the pure-blood houses will fall into line, as they always have. They are wrong, because somewhere in the Slytherin ranks, there is already one heir whose loyalty has hairline fractures running straight through it, whose sole resonance answers not to a Dark Lord's promises, but to the image of a Muggle-born girl standing between danger and the weak. Wars are not decided by banners alone. They are decided in the private choices no one sees. The question is, what happens when Draco Malfoy is finally asked to choose in daylight, and Hermione Granger is no longer safely on the other side of the room, but directly in the path of his family's war? Yule Ball fracture. When Malfoy finally sees her, the answer arrives in silk and candlelight. It does not look like a battlefield, but it is one. The Yule Ball is Hogwarts pretending to be a fortress of civility rather than a school bracing for war, its stone corridors softened by garlands and frost-charmed holly. In this timeline, the pure-blood heirs descend, expecting spectacle and hierarchy reaffirmed, not a fracture in their own ideology. They are wrong. Hermione's entrance is not merely an aesthetic reveal. It is a tactical detonation. She steps onto the staircase in periwinkle robes, but catch the enchanted light. Hair, tamed but not erased, spine held with the unself-conscious authority of someone who has fought trolls and basilisks and exams, and won. Canon frames Ron's slack-jawed stare as the central reaction. Here, the camera cuts away to Draco Malfoy, frozen halfway through a smirk that never lands. He had been primed for cruelty. Pansy at his elbow, a Slytherin chorus behind him, rehearsed lines about the Mudblood's makeover, already sharpened on his tongue. But as Hermione descends, the insult stalls, then dies, smothered by something he has never been trained to identify. His father taught him to evaluate bloodlines with methodical certainty, to read surnames like battle standards. Instead, he finds himself cataloguing details with almost scientific focus, the precise angle of her chin as she laughs at Victor Crumb's whispered comment, the way her hand rests lightly on the champion's arm, yet never clings, the simple fact that she moves through this glittering pure-blood gallery as though she belongs more than half the lineages preening around her. This is the pattern interrupt his upbringing never prepared for, the realization that the Muggle-born he was ordered to despise has more effortless presence than boys bred in alpine estates and ancient manors, a weapon being polished in the dark, but not for his side. The first open test comes as she passes. Pansy nudges him, eyes bright with expectation, demanding the cruelty that has always been his role. Draco obliges in form, but not in essence. The insult he delivers is milder than canon, a brittle remark about Crumb lowering his standards. The word mudblood conspicuously absent. His tone is wrong, too flat, almost hesitant, and Hermione feels it before she understands it. She turns, frowning, gaze catching his for a fraction too long, sensing a dissonance she cannot yet name. Soul resonance misfiring across enemy lines. Later, the night fragments. Music swells. Alliances blur under spiked punch. And Draco drifts, momentarily separated from his Slytherin orbit. On a balcony washed in cold moonlight, he finds her alone, arms folded against the winter air. Crumb vanished back inside. The silence between them is not empty. It is charged. Their dialogue begins with barbs. His reflexive sneer at her charity projects, her weary dismissal of his family's politics. But something slips. He asks, almost against his own will, why she spends her time fighting for house elves when the world already underestimates her. The question lands heavier than any insult. For a breath, his mask cracks, curiosity and something like reluctant respect bleeding through. Then he retreats, horrified by his own deviation from the script, fleeing back to the safety of Slytherin shadows. Hermione watches him go. Aloud, she labels him hopeless, the word a shield for Ron and Harry's benefit later. Privately, she files away the balcony, the missing slur, the unguarded question, as data in a growing dossier on Draco Malfoy's inconsistencies. Draco, returning to the ballroom, understands with the clarity of prophecy that he has just seen the future his father promised him, a world of masks, of alliances arranged like chess pieces, of bloodlines curated like art. In that vision, Hermione Granger does not exist, except as collateral. And yet, standing in periwinkle at the top of the stairs, she had felt less like an intruder and more like a masterpiece to be moulded by no one. For the first time, he wants something else. And wanting, in the Slytherin timeline, is the first act of treason. Goblet of fire reforged. Jealousy, crumb, and quiet sabotage. Wanting is treason. And treason, in this timeline, does not stay theoretical for long. The World Cup is the first fracture. When the dark mark burns green against the sky, Draco's cannon's smugness, those lazy taunts about enjoying the show, becomes, here, a carefully engineered mask. He knows exactly whose wand hands are moving in the dark. He knows what that skull means over the tents, while muggles hang in the air like broken marionettes. His eyes are not on the sky at all. They are on Hermione Granger. He watches the way she clutches Harry and Ron, the way her gaze snaps toward the mark with horrified comprehension, and he understands something his housemates refuse to articulate. If that symbol returns to power, her name is already on a list. The Malfoy heir has been raised to see war as an inevitability, a methodical certainty, written in bloodlines and prophecies. Now, for the first time, that abstract war has a face, bushy hair, ink-stained fingers, a girl who should never have been allowed to matter. By the time Durmstrang's ship rises from the lake, jealousy arrives dressed as geopolitics. Victor Crumb is not merely a rival at the Yule Ball. He is an international Quidditch star, openly fascinated by a Muggle-born mind. In the Slytherin timeline, That is not romance. That is a threat vector. If foreign schools and global celebrities begin to prize Muggle-born brilliance, then pure-blood supremacy is not just immoral, it is strategically obsolete. Draco's envy, watching Hermione disappear into the library with Crumb, is laced with a cold, political anxiety. The ideology that built his family's fortress is eroding under her every answer. Rita Skeeter circles this tension like a beetle drawn to blood. In canon, she stumbles on her stories. In this timeline, Draco discovers her animagus secret early, a weapon being polished in the dark if he chooses to use it. He could feed her lies about Hermione and Crumb, poison public opinion, reduce Hermione back to a caricature. Instead, with silky aristocratic courtesy, he redirects. Harry is the spectacle, the Triwizard narrative, the safer target. Draco leaks fragments about the boy who lived's temper, his isolation, his supposed arrogance, quietly turning Rita's quill away from Hermione's reputation without ever appearing to defend her. Inside Slytherin, the pressure intensifies. His housemates, drunk on tradition and boredom, plan to hex Hermione's dress robes, to transform Periwinkle into something obscene the moment she steps into the Great Hall. Draco ends it with a single glacial decree. It is beneath them. Malfoys do not waste magic on petty vandalism. They believe him. They are wrong. The motive is not pride, it is panic. He is not ready to see her humiliated for a laughter he no longer shares. When whispers of the graveyard reach the manor, Voldemort restored, a boy returned, shaking and branded. Draco watches his parents' composure crack. Lucius's hands tremble. Narcissa's questions come too fast. War is no longer a distant legend. It is assembling names, assets, and targets with tactically lethal focus. And somewhere near the top of that invisible ledger stands the girl Draco Malfoy cannot stop watching, aligned with the wrong side of every prophecy he has ever been told. He begins to understand. To save her, he may have to betray everything that was meant to save him. Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge, rebellion, and a Slytherin's silent defection. Umbridge's arrival should, in theory, be a gift to Draco Malfoy. Here is the Ministry itself, descending on Hogwarts to enforce the ideology he was raised to revere, wrapped in pink wool and legal authority. The Slytherin timeline appears to be aligning with Lucius Malfoy's design. Dumbledore diminished, blood purity codified, dissent punished with methodical certainty. They are wrong, because in this timeline, the fantasy curdles on contact with reality. Umbridge is not the elegant, aristocratic supremacy of his Alpine childhood dinners. She is petty, vindictive, and viscerally delighted by pain. The first time he watches Hermione Granger's hand carve words into her own skin under that quill, something in him recoils, not as a political dissenter, but as a boy who has been quietly tracking the soul resonance of one particular Gryffindor for years. This is his father's world, ministry approved and weaponized, and it looks like torture in a school corridor. The irony is surgical. Umbridge appoints him to the inquisitorial squad, makes him her favoured hound, and Draco understands at once that the leash runs both ways. He hears whispers of a secret group, a student militia training under Dumbledore's nose, Dumbledore's army. At first report, He almost smiles. Of course, Hermione would not merely complain. She would organize, codify, turn resistance into a syllabus. His instincts, honed by years of being told that glory is obedience, say, expose them, deliver names, watch her fall. He does not. Instead, a quieter campaign begins, a weapon being polished in the dark, but pointed away from its makers. A scrap of parchment listing meeting times appears in his hand. It should go straight to Umbridge. Draco loses it between classes, watching it drift conveniently into a fireplace. When a Ravenclaw is caught near the room of requirement, he confidently misidentifies them as a bored prefect, sending Umbridge herring off after the wrong quarry, while Hermione slips past behind a vanishing cabinet. Each interference is minor enough to be dismissed as adolescent incompetence, yet precise enough to preserve Hermione's plausible deniability. He delays reports, mistranscribes surnames, misremembers dates. In this timeline, bureaucracy becomes his shield, silence his rebellion. The DA survives longer, not because the world is blind, but because one Slytherin heir keeps nudging the gaze a few inches away. Then, the war stops being theoretical. The Department of Mysteries explodes into rumor, fear, and hospital admissions. Draco is not there. He is left with fragments, Potter, prophecy, Death Eaters, and the quiet, brutal phrase that matters most: Granger was hurt. Badly. That night, Hogwarts is a fortress of locked doors and whispered alarms. Draco slips through it, under a disillusionment charm, heartbeat loud in his ears, the corridors warped and wavering around him. In the hospital wing, the world narrows to one bed. Hermione, pale against white sheets, hair dull with dust and spell residue, bandages stark against her skin. He stands in the dark and catalogues the facts like evidence in a trial. She went to the ministry to fight his side. She bled for a prophecy that names his master. She almost died, and he would have learned of it from a headline. The distance between them is suddenly unbearable. He leans closer, words barely more than breath, not a confession, but a verdict against his own inheritance. I won't let them use me to kill you. It is the first time Draco Malfoy consciously positions himself against Voldemort's design, even if only in his own mind, and the decision hangs in the air like an unforgivable not yet cast, because as the year bleeds out and the war accelerates, the Dark Lord will finally turn his gaze to Hogwarts, and when he does, Draco's name will be called. The question is no longer whether he will betray someone, it is who. Half-Blood Prince, the assassin who loves the target. Voldemort answers that question with methodical certainty. In the dead winter of this 6th year timeline, he summons Draco to a drawing room that has seen centuries of pure-blood war councils and reduces it to a private execution chamber of expectations. The assignment is simple in structure and catastrophic in implication. Kill Albus Dumbledore, or watch the Malfoy line broken, publicly, as an example. In this timeline, he adds a casual cruelty, open contempt for mudbloods like that Granger girl, a promise that when Hogwarts falls, witches like her will be the first erased. Draco hears the words as both threat and prophecy. The Dark Lord is not merely demanding a murder. He is sketching a world in which Hermione's brilliance is an offence punishable by extinction. The boy who once spat mudblood as a weapon now hears it as a death sentence, with her name embedded in the syllables. Back at Hogwarts, the war objective becomes a logistical puzzle. A vanishing cabinet, smuggled Death Eaters, poisoned mead, cursed necklaces. On the surface, Draco is a weapon being polished in the dark, moving through corridors with a new, brittle authority. But the narrative in this Slytherin timeline keeps cutting away from the mechanics of assassination to the quiet, damning contrast of Hermione Granger simply existing. Hermione in the library, quill flying, cross-referencing arithmancy tables with war histories. Hermione in Slughorn's class, wand steady as she perfects a draught of living death while Draco's hand shakes over a bezoar. Hermione in the common room, arguing with Harry that Malfoy is clearly up to something, dissecting his behavior with forensic precision. She is unknowingly performing a psychological autopsy on the boy who is trying not to become her murderer. Slughorn's parties become pressure cookers disguised as soirees. Gilded lamps, floating music, crystal goblets, and Hermione, invited, praised, introduced as one of the brightest witches of her age, to ministry officials and old families who, in another timeline, would have dismissed her as mud on their boots. Draco watches from the threshold, uninvited, as the establishment begins to pivot. Every toast to her talent is a quiet referendum on his upbringing. If this is the future Dumbledore is curating, then killing Dumbledore does not just remove a headmaster, it hands the world back to men who want Hermione's name scrubbed from history. The bathroom confrontation with Harry fractures under this new pressure, when Draco's composure finally shatters, when he chokes on his own reflection, and the tiled walls close in like a fortress, collapsing inward. The image that undoes him is not only his parents on their knees, it is Hermione among the nameless victims in Voldemort's new order. His tears are not abstract fear, they are grief for a possible world in which she lives, teaches, legislates, reshapes the very laws that once condemned her. By the time he stands on the astronomy tower, wand levelled at Dumbledore, the scene is a ritualized test of soul resonance. Death Eaters breathe behind him, the night wind howls, and one thought will not leave. If he crosses this line, there is no universe where Hermione Granger can see anything but a monster wearing his face. The choice is no longer between his family and his conscience. It is between the future Voldemort promised and the future Hermione might build. And in that suspended second, the war for Draco Malfoy's allegiance truly begins. Astronomy Tower twist, choosing Hermione over the Dark Lord. The Astronomy Tower becomes the fulcrum of this entire timeline. Not the graveyard, not the forest, this wind-scoured ledge where a boy raised on hierarchy is asked to choose between a Dark Lord and a Muggle-born girl he was trained to despise. They are wrong. All those later historians who claim Draco Malfoy never truly had a choice. The scene unfolds with methodical certainty. The storm claws at the stone. The castle itself feels like a besieged fortress, every parapet listening. Dumbledore leans against the battlements, skeletal, wandless, and yet somehow still the highest authority in the world. Draco's hand shakes so violently the wand tip judders, scattering greenish reflections across Dumbledore's glasses, like fractured killing curses that never quite land. Dumbledore studies him, not as a failure to be condemned, but as a masterpiece to be moulded that he might not live to see completed. His voice is soft, almost conversational, cutting through the howl of the wind with surgical precision. You care for someone you've been taught to despise, Draco, Miss Granger. The name lands heavier than any spell. Draco flinches, because the old man has just named the one secret he has not dared articulate, even in the privacy of his own mind. In this timeline, Dumbledore does not wield Hermione as leverage. He offers her as proof that Draco is already off the path carved for him in marble and blood. He speaks of sanctuary, yes, protection for Narcissa, even for Lucius if he will take it. But then he goes further, sketching, in a few exhausted sentences, a future where blood status is irrelevant, where talent, discipline, and courage define worth. A world where Hermione's SPEW badges are not an embarrassment, but an early, clumsy articulation of justice. Draco flashes, unbidden, to those badges, to her furious speeches about house elves and chains, to parchments scattered across the Gryffindor table like tiny manifestos. Once, he mocked her for it. Now, the memory carries a strange soul resonance, the outline of a world that does not require him to be his father's son. When the Death Eaters burst onto the tower, the Slytherin timeline fractures in plain sight. Greyback's hunger, the Carrow's glee, Bellatrix's wild exultation in other tellings, here replaced by lesser names, but the same dark intent. In canon, Draco's wand remains raised until Snape arrives, paralysis masquerading as poise. Here, the decision comes earlier, and it is visible. He lowers his wand, not in defeat, but in refusal. For a single heartbeat, he steps between Dumbledore and the oncoming predators, not close enough to shield, but close enough that no one can mistake the geometry of the moment. Malfoy heir on the wrong side of the line. Snape still comes. The unforgivable still flies. Dumbledore still falls, his arc through the air as inevitable as prophecy. But the narrative that races back to Voldemort is altered at the root. Draco did not merely hesitate. He balked because of her, because of the mudblood. A weapon being polished in the dark suddenly looks unreliable. By dawn, the whispers are already circulating through the Death Eater ranks. The Malfoy boy is soft on a Muggle born, his wand hand corrupted by Gryffindor eyes and Gryffindor principles. In this war, that is treason. Draco runs with them through the corridors, but his flight is fractured as the dark mark blooms over the castle, sickly and triumphant. He glances back only once, not at the skull and serpent staining the clouds, not at the tower where a body lies cooling, but toward the distant silhouette of Gryffindor Tower. Hermione Granger sleeps behind those walls, unaware that her existence has just rewritten Voldemort's assessment of his own inner circle, that the chain of command of the coming war is already warping around a boy who chose her over absolute obedience. The Dark Lord thinks he can still use Draco. He is wrong, because love has entered his calculations now, and love is tactically lethal when aimed at the right target. Deftly Hallows Divergence, a Malfoy double agent for one witch. By the time the Snatchers drag 3 half-frozen prisoners through the gates of Malfoy Manor, Draco's treachery already exists, small, a weapon being polished in the dark. The world assumes this house is a fortress of pure blood certainty, a place where loyalty is a methodical certainty. They are wrong. In the marble hall, under the cold blaze of the chandelier, the scene plays out with near canonical precision. Lucius, desperate for restored favour, Bellatrix, vibrating with suspicion, a swollen-faced boy, a bleeding redhead, a witch whose features Draco could sketch from memory with his eyes closed. In canon, he hesitates to name Harry. In this timeline, that hesitation is sharpened, narrowed to a single gravitational point: Hermione Granger. He recognizes her instantly. His soul resonance with her has been forged through years of quiet observation, of arguments across house lines, of a forbidden admiration he never allowed to surface. When Bellatrix demands confirmation, his gaze lingers a fraction too long on Hermione, and then slides away. "I can't be sure," he says, voice steady in the silence. It is the first deliberate betrayal of Voldemort made in Hermione's favour. It will not be the last. What follows in the drawing room is not merely a torture scene. It is Draco Malfoy's private apocalypse. Bellatrix has always been a familiar spectre in his Alpine childhood memories, a laughing shadow at pure-blood gatherings, the mad aunt whose cruelty was framed as strength. Now he is forced to stand in the corridor as that same woman carves into the arm of the girl he loves, turning ideology into literal scar tissue. The screams echo through the manor's corridors like a war hymn gone wrong. Each cry is another fracture line in the pure blood edifice he was raised to worship. This is the breaking point, not a philosophical debate, not Dumbledore's speeches, but the sight of mudblood being engraved into Hermione's flesh by a woman his parents once called family. In this Slytherin timeline, Draco's disillusionment is not abstract. It has a name, a voice, a body on the floor. When Dobby's intervention shatters the scene and the trio escape, canon would suggest Draco retreats into fear. Here, he moves into calculation, slowly at first, then with increasing precision, he begins to feed the Death Eaters information that is always almost right. A safe house reported in the wrong valley. A rumour of Potter's allies massing in a region where Hermione has already left. Exaggerated troop counts that pull squads away from Muggle-born hideouts. Each misdirection is small enough to be dismissed as fog of war error, yet collectively they keep her one step ahead of the noose, tightening around her kind. By the time the trio slip back into Hogwarts and the Room of Requirement becomes their shifting fortress, Draco is hunting them with a divided heart. Outwardly, he plays the role, leading Crabbe and Goyle, parroting authority, combing corridors. Inwardly, every corridor he searches is one he silently hopes she has already abandoned. When Fiendfire erupts, the divergence becomes explicit. His choice to follow Harry into the Inferno is not merely self-preservation. It is a desperate attempt to ensure Hermione survives a chaos he helped engineer. He is dragged across burning debris by the very people he spent years antagonizing, coughing, half-choked, but his eyes never leave her. So when Voldemort finally marches on Hogwarts, Draco is no longer simply a frightened heir. He is a double agent whose only consistent priority is Hermione Granger's survival, even if it means betraying his family's war, his house's pride, and the boy he once tried to be. The question is no longer whether he will betray someone. The question is how far he is willing to go when the Dark Lord demands a demonstration of loyalty, and Hermione is within reach. Battle of Hogwarts, when a Slytherin shields a Gryffindor. The Battle of Hogwarts is where sentiment is supposed to die. War, we are told, burns nuance out of people until only sides remain. In this timeline, they are wrong. Nuance walks into the courtyard in Slytherin green and throws itself between Hermione Granger and death. Hermione is already running on fumes when it happens, hair wild, robes scorched, wand arm trembling from spell fatigue, as she duels two masked Death Eaters beneath the shattered arches. Harry has been pulled toward the central melee. Ron is fending off curses from the stairwell. And, for 3 lethal seconds, she is alone. A tactically lethal mind trapped in a body that is finally slowing. She disarms one opponent, stuns the second, and never sees the third wand rise behind her through the dust. The curse is a streak of sickly blue, angled cleanly for her spine. Draco Malfoy reaches her first. The motion is inelegant, almost panicked, a shield charm thrown late, a twist of his body, the impact slamming into his shoulder instead of her heart. Bone cracks. He hits the flagstones hard, white blonde hair smeared with blood, and the courtyard's noise seems to recede into a sudden, surgical silence. Hermione stares at him as if the world has glitched. This is the boy who once called her mudblood with adolescent authority. Now he is gasping through gritted teeth because he made himself a wall between her and annihilation. Ron's reaction is instant and furious. Wand trained on Draco, voice hoarse, demanding to know what game he thinks he's playing. Harry, by contrast, does not shout. He calculates. In the Slytherin timeline, Potter has learned that every weapon on the field, even a treacherous one, is a variable to be leveraged. The pattern interrupts itself in a heartbeat. A fresh wave of curses drives them into a side corridor, stone dust raining, torches guttering. Cornered, the 4 of them form an awkward instinctive circle, Gryffindor backs pressed to Slytherin, old house lines erased by sheer proximity to death. Draco's voice, tight with pain but clinically precise, cuts through the chaos as he calls out incoming hex patterns, identifies a feint that would have gutted Ron, redirects Hermione's shield a crucial inch. Twice, his knowledge of Death Eater drills saves them from being flanked. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, turned against the hand that forged him. Hermione notices first what this means beyond survival. If Draco Malfoy is visibly fighting at Harry Potter's side, then every wavering Slytherin, every pure-blood fence-sitter watching this war from their ancestral fortress is being handed permission to defect. His betrayal is not just emotional, it is a masterpiece to be molded into propaganda. The cost is immediate. When they burst back into a wider hall, they are met by a knot of Death Eaters, regrouping under a tattered banner. One of them rips off his mask, face twisted with outrage, and the accusation lands like another curse. Blood, traitor. He names Hermione explicitly, spitting that Draco has thrown away the Malfoy name for a mudblood. The word hangs in the air with a new resonance, less insult than diagnosis. Draco does not deny it. He simply raises his wand again and stands fractionally closer to her. By the time Voldemort's voice rolls over the grounds, demanding a ceasefire to display Harry's supposed corpse. The lines have been redrawn. The defenders gather in the courtyard, a broken semicircle of grief and defiance. The Death Eaters array themselves opposite, a dark phalanx under their master's gaze. And there, in the liminal space between, stands Draco Malfoy, blood soaking his sleeve, ash on his face, Hermione's hand steadying his uninjured arm. In this timeline, the Malfoy name changes sides in front of the entire wizarding world. It is not whispered in drawing rooms. It is carved into the night with wandlight and fear. Voldemort registers the absence in his ranks, the defection written in posture and proximity, and files it away with methodical certainty. Love has just declared itself a strategic threat. The ceasefire will not hold, but everyone now knows exactly where Draco Malfoy will be standing when it shatters. Aftermath and reckoning. Can Hermione ever forgive him? The wizarding world will later tell itself a comforting story about the Battle of Hogwarts, that lines were clear, loyalties fixed, and justice clean. They are wrong. The Great Hall, in this timeline, ends not as a triumphant tableau, but as a ruinous ledger. Bodies on stone, families kneeling in fragmented clusters, the air heavy with smoke, and the metallic resonance of spent curses. At one end, the Malfoys are a collapsed dynasty, huddled together like a broken crest, torn from a ruined fortress. Lucius stares at the floor, the wand hand that once wielded power, now trembling in useless silence. Narcissa's gaze never leaves her son, as if willing his pulse to remain tethered to this dark, unstable world. And Draco, pale, hollow-eyed, the boy who stepped in front of a curse for a Muggle-born, keeps looking across the hall. He looks to where Hermione moves with methodical certainty among the wounded, robes soaked, hair matted, voice steady as she stabilizes a curse-rent shoulder, seals a chest, conjures a stretcher. Harry is beside her, Ron just behind, their trio reconstituted by war and grief. Each time Draco's eyes find her profile, he remembers the moment his body moved before his mind, a weapon being polished in the dark suddenly choosing its own target. The first real reckoning does not happen under vaulted ceilings and watching crowds. It happens days later in a quiet stone corridor that still smells faintly of burn marks and healing potions. Hermione is alone, carrying a stack of files for the ad hoc war tribunal when Draco steps out of the shadows. No entourage, no parents, just the heir of a disgraced house, stripped of authority and affectation. He does not confess love. In this timeline, that word would be grotesque against fresh graves. Instead, he apologizes with clinical precision for mudblood, for every corridor where he looked away, for every time he chose the safety of his surname over the decency she embodied. Hermione listens, jaw tight, eyes bright, the memory of him taking that curse colliding with the older, deeper memories of slurs, plots, and the dark mark on his arm. Rage and trauma tell her this is too little, too late. But soul resonance is inconvenient. She cannot unknow that when the world narrowed to a single killing light, Draco moved. Ron finds out almost immediately. For him, Draco is not a conflicted masterpiece to be moulded. He is the boy who made Hermione cry in second year, the prefect who weaponized fear during Umbridge's reign, the emblem of every corridor where Gryffindors walked, tense and watchful. The idea that Hermione might even consider forgiving him feels like betrayal squared, personal and ideological. Ron's anger is not subtle, it is volcanic, an aftershock of a war that was supposed to have ended. Harry, by contrast, has seen too much ambiguity to indulge in clean hatred. He watched Draco lower his wand on the astronomy tower, felt the hesitation in the room of requirement, noticed the way Malfoy's curses always landed just wide when Hermione was in the line of fire. He does not trust Draco, but he recognizes the pressure of being a weapon, the way a boy can be engineered toward darkness and still flinch. His reluctant, almost bureaucratic support, hear him out if you want to, gives Hermione political and emotional cover. So she does not forgive him. Not yet. Instead, she offers a conditional armistice, correspondence about legal reforms, about how to dismantle blood purity laws without creating a new underclass of Slytherin exiles. Letters, she says, nothing more. But in the Slytherin timeline, parchment can be tactically lethal. Each exchange forces Draco to articulate a different world than the one he inherited, and forces Hermione to admit that some of the most incisive critiques of post-war justice come from a Malfoy quill. Their relationship remains unresolved, suspended between indictment and possibility. The war is over. The reckoning is not. And every owl that crosses the alpine winds between Malfoy Manor and Hermione's cramped ministry office is a question the new world is not yet ready to answer. 10 years later, a world rewritten by one impossible love. 10 years later, those alpine owls are no longer anomalies. They are arteries in a reordered political bloodstream. The wizarding world tells itself that the war ended, the victors rebuilt, and history settled into methodical certainty. They are wrong. In this timeline, the real revolution arrives slowly in subcommittee minutes and midnight votes, and it wears Hermione Granger's tired eyes. She has become the ministry's most relentless instrument of structural change. Not a weapon being polished in the dark, but an open blade on the floor of the Wizengamot. Officially, she sits in magical law enforcement, with a joint appointment to the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Unofficially, every serious proposal touching Muggle-born rights, house self-autonomy, or the dismantling of pure-blood privileges passes through her quill. She is the quiet architect behind repealed bloodline clauses, behind new protections that treat lineage as irrelevant, behind a legal framework that makes mudblood not just an insult, but grounds for sanction. Across the aisle, Draco Malfoy occupies a narrower, more precarious ledge. The Malfoy vaults are diminished, the family estates under permanent audit, and his every public appearance is annotated by old headlines and older suspicions. Yet in Slytherin circles, his authority is paradoxically enhanced. He is the heir who walked through the war, refused to kill on a tower, and survived both Voldemort and the Ministry's tribunals. He cannot command power openly, so he cultivates resonance instead, whispered influence in drawing rooms where the portraits still hiss about blood, and in the rebuilt Slytherin common room where younger snakes study him as a case study in survival. Their trajectories intersect with tactical inevitability. Joint commissions on post-war reparations, education reform, and Auror oversight require signatures from both the new order and the old families. Hermione is the moral engine, Draco the reluctant translator. Their debates become legendary. Hermione arguing from principle with almost judicial ferocity. Draco countering with cynical realism about what frightened, cornered purebloods will accept without igniting another war. In the silence between barbs, the tower is always there. The courtyard is always there. The memory of a wand lowered instead of raised hangs like a second, invisible agenda. Lucius Malfoy watches this from a reduced wing of Malfoy Manor, a once imperial fortress turned into a gilded quarantine. To him, Hermione is not merely a witch, she is the living emblem of defeat. The Muggle-born who infiltrated law, rewrote custom, and now dares to speak beside his son as an equal. Narcissa is harder to read. She remembers lying to Voldemort with a single, tactically lethal word to save Draco. She recognizes the same steel in Hermione's refusal to bend. When society whispers about a possible Malfoy-Granger alliance, Narcissa does not correct them. She pours tea and listens. Whether they are lovers, co-conspirators, or a masterpiece to be molded into something even more dangerous, the crucial fact is simpler. The Malfoy name no longer guarantees allegiance to blood purity. In this Slytherin timeline, one forbidden attachment has cracked a centuries-old ideology, letting in an unwelcome light. The question is not whether the world has changed. The question is how far Hermione and Draco are willing to push it when the next crisis demands a choice that makes the war look merciful. Meta-analysis. Why Draco Hermione changes everything we think we know. To understand why this forbidden attachment detonates the narrative, we have to step back from corridors and curses and look at the architecture of the series itself. The Harry Potter saga insists again and again that blood is noise and choice is signal, that love is the only reliable magic against death, and that destiny is merely the pressure that reveals who you already are. They are wrong, or rather, they are incomplete. Canon tests these ideas at the level of friendship, family, and sacrificial courage. Draco falling in love with Hermione in this timeline is the stress test that exposes their full, uncomfortable range. When the heir of a blood supremacist dynasty experiences soul resonance, not with a pure blood ornament, but with the Muggle-born girl he once called Mudblood, the ideology of blood purity is not simply disproved, it is humiliated. The entire doctrine collapses under the weight of its own exception. Draco's arc becomes, in effect, a live demonstration of ideological deprogramming. His childhood has been a methodical certainty, polished manners, inherited prejudices, a future mapped with the precision of a family tree. Then, second and third year arrive, and Hermione's competence keeps intersecting his survival. Polyjuice plots unraveled, basilisk mysteries solved, time turner nights where she is the one who makes the impossible possible. Each encounter is a hairline fracture in the Malfoy worldview. No grand speech from Dumbledore could do what the repeated, intimate failure of his assumptions does. Belief erodes not in a single revelation, but in a slow, tactically lethal drip. Crucially, Hermione is not written as his savior. She is a fixed moral point, a fortress of principle in a world that keeps demanding compromise. She does not soften her outrage at his slurs. She does not dilute her advocacy for house elves to spare his pride. She does not reframe her brilliance to be less threatening to an aristocratic ego. Draco orbits her, not the other way around, forced to measure the smallness of his upbringing against the undeniable scale of her worth. The masterpiece to be moulded here is not Hermione. It is the collapse and reconstruction of Draco Malfoy. Contrast this with canon, where his redemption is a rumour glimpsed in corridor hesitations and a lowered wand on the astronomy tower. In the original timeline, his moral shift is off-page, inferred. In this Slytherin timeline, tying his transformation to a specific forbidden love renders every choice visible, bloody, and priced. Hiding her from Death Eater raids, sabotaging Umbridge's surveillance, hesitating when ordered to identify her at the manor. Each action drags the theme of choice out of abstraction and into bruised, cinematic detail. And once one Malfoy heir defects for love of a Muggle-born, Slytherin house itself must be reread. The stereotype insists that Slytherin is a weapon being polished in the dark for pure blood supremacy alone. This AU answers with a quieter horror. If the ideology can be undone by proximity, by affection, by the simple, unbearable reality of Hermione Granger existing in the same classroom, then the creed was always fragile. The hope is the same. If Draco can reorient his ambition around protecting what he was raised to despise, then the house's potential for change is far greater than canon allows. The war, in other words, was never only about Voldemort. It was about which bonds would prove stronger than the scripts written for these children. The next crisis will not ask Draco and Hermione what they believe. It will ask what they are willing to break to prove it. Closing, the forbidden romance that could have ended the war sooner. In this timeline, that question becomes the fulcrum on which an entire war tilts. What are Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger willing to break, not just in the world around them, but inside themselves? The wizarding world assumes that ideology is a fortress, that blood purity stands or falls as a monolith. They are wrong. The divergence begins with a single word in a sunlit corridor, mudblood, meant as a weapon, landing instead as a curse that recoils on its caster. Draco sees the blood on Hermione's teeth after the hex, hears the stunned silence of the crowd, and for the first time recognizes his own voice as something tactically lethal, not merely cruel. From that moment, every encounter is haunted by regret. The library apologies, never spoken, the glances at the Gryffindor table that last a heartbeat too long. By the Yule Ball, the fracture is visible. Canon gives us a jealous Ron and a wounded Hermione. In this Slytherin timeline, we add a pale boy on the stairs, watching Victor Crumb offer her a hand that should have been his. The confrontation that follows is not just adolescent pettiness, but a political crisis in miniature. Draco choking on the language he was raised in. Hermione refusing to be a masterpiece to be moulded by anyone's shame. One dance declined becomes a tectonic shift in house alliances. On the astronomy tower, the deviation hardens into treason. Draco's wand is shaking, Dumbledore's voice is steady, and Hermione is somewhere below, unaware that her survival is the unspoken variable in every calculation. When Draco lowers his wand, it is not mercy in the abstract. It is a boy choosing one Muggle-born witch over the entire architecture of Voldemort's authority. A weapon being polished in the dark turns, for a second, toward the light and refuses to fire. By the Battle of Hogwarts, the pattern is clear. Where canon gives us hesitation and flight, this timeline offers a Slytherin heir stepping between a curse and a Gryffindor witch, green light colliding with a hastily raised shield. In that instant, Draco's body becomes a thesis that blood purity can be undone from within its own aristocracy, that soul resonance can form across the very lines meant to prevent it. One shield, one scar, and the war's moral geometry is rewritten. Emotionally, the arc is brutal. Draco moves from contempt to fixation to a kind of sacrificial guardianship that terrifies him more than the dark mark. Hermione, meanwhile, is forced into the most uncomfortable recognition of all: that people can change in ways that complicate justice, that the boy who called her a slur might also be the man who drags her out of Malfoy Manor alive. Forgiveness, in this framework, is not a warm epilogue, it is a battlefield. So the lingering questions remain, hanging over the rubble of the castle. If Draco had turned double agent earlier, driven not by Dumbledore's abstractions, but by the immediate visceral need to keep Hermione breathing, would the war have ended months sooner? Would she ever fully trust him? Or would every shared silence still hum with the memory of that first insult? And if, years later, they had children, would those lives, half Malfoy, half Muggle-born brilliance, stand as living proof that bloodlines are an illusion maintained only by fear? This is one version, rendered with methodical certainty, but it is not the only one. In the comments, write your own key scenes: the Yule Ball confrontation you'd stage, the Malfoy Manor rescued you'd choreograph, the exact moment Hermione admits, aloud or in silence, that she sees Draco differently. If this exploration of forbidden resonance and war-altering romance worked for you, like the video, subscribe, and stay with this channel as we continue to build dark, cinematic what-ifs that turn familiar canon into a laboratory of alternate timelines.